May 23rd, 1973 was a seemingly normal day for Judy Doraty and her family. They'd spent the evening playing bingo in Houston, and as darkness fell, they began their drive back home to Texas City. The highway would have been relatively quiet and presumably traffic-free, and they were making good time. Everything was normal until it wasn't. What came next would change the course of Judy's life forever.
It's like a spotlight that's shining down on the back of my car. I can see an animal being taken up in this. I can see it squirming and trying to get free, and it's like it's being sucked up.
But this isn't simply a terrifying tale of a family's encounter with high strangeness, one that arguably provided the first link between alien abductions and the cattle mutilation phenomena. It's about the people that influenced the story, their strange and often misguided motivations, the ramifications of their actions, not only on the lives of Judy and her family, but on countless other supposed abductees, and how Judy's story would become the blueprint for another bizarre abduction case that will lead us right back to the strangeness of Dulce, New Mexico. This is also a story about memory, that tricky and sometimes unreliable thing that we often take for granted, and how it can be manipulated by even the most well-meaning of people. This is the story of the abduction and the subsequent exploitation of Judy Doraty. This video is brought to you by viewer support on Patreon. You can join for £3 a month, which will give you early access to videos and access to our Discord server. On other tiers, you get access to Patreon-only podcasts and videos. So what are you waiting for? Find the link in the description and sign up today. Give me something to remember you by. March 13th, 1980. In a quiet, dimly lit room somewhere in the great American Southwest, cameraman Richard Lerner and investigative reporter Linda Moulton Howe are setting up lights for a film shoot. They're here to record Judy Doraty's second ever hypnosis session. The first had been back on October 21st, 1978, and Judy had credited it with helping to unlock some of her memory of that terrifying night back in 1973. The footage they'll capture today will eventually be used in Linda's 1980 cult classic documentary A Strange Harvest, presented as undeniable proof of the link between cattle mutilations and UFOs. Understandably nervous at the prospect of having to relive the journey again, Judy and Linda step outside for a cigarette. I just want to know what happened to me. Sometimes when I'm washing dishes or working around the house, I remember something about contamination, medical. Lives will be lost. I don't know, sometimes my hands shake. It bothers me so much.
Do you still have dreams or nightmares?
Yes, not as much as I used to.
Leo says that when people relive their repressed experiences under hypnosis, it helps, like lancing a boil.
Sometimes I'm not sure I want to know. In her book, An Alien Harvest, Linda compares Judy to a wounded deer. She's described as a small woman with glistening dark eyes, but that's about it. Whether the lack of information about her is purposeful or not is hard to tell. According to Linda, Judy was reluctant to have her hypnosis session filmed, and she was hesitant about going public with her story. In many of the retellings of Judy's case, people write that she didn't want her married name to be revealed. I can only assume that she changed her mind because, as far as I know, her name was actually Judy Doraty. I tried to find out more about Judy using the only means that I had, a mix of Ancestry and newspapers.com, and the results were less than illuminating, although I'm still not exactly sure what I was even expecting to find. Judy was born in St. Louis, Missouri on the 16th of July 1940. She had her first child, Lucinda, with Bill Hatridge in January 1958. By 1963, she had moved to Texas and met the man that would be her husband for the next 42 years. His name was James Wade Doraty. They met while he was working in the Galveston Police Department. James was part of the US Marine Corps and had served in South Vietnam in 1967. As far as I know, he was still there in 1973 when Judy and the family had their experience. As for Judy, there was one newspaper account that listed her as a victim of a robbery in Lamarck, Texas in 1971. But there's really no way of knowing whether or not it was actually her. May 23rd, 1973 began like any other day. Judy and her family had organised a visit to Houston to play bingo. She drove them there and back. Her mother Catherine was in the front seat, and in the back were her sister-in-law and brother-in-law, and her daughter Cindy. On their journey home, Judy's mother pointed out a light in the sky. Her brother-in-law said that it seemed to be a helicopter with a large spotlight, but it appeared to be stationary in the sky. According to Judy's recollection, she pulled over to the side of the road and looked at it, trying to figure out exactly what it was, but it was impossible. What actually happened next is sadly lost to the annals of history, the original recollection blurred by a series of hypnotic regressions. But from what I can ascertain, Judy came away from the experience believing that she had missing time. According to her, she was plagued with headaches and strange dreams. It was this, combined with the feeling that something had happened to her out on the road that night, that had led her to contact the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization.
We collect reports from all around the world, and we analyze these reports and make some judgments as to their merit, and we accumulate a library which is available to scientists to study.
Both Coral and Jim had worked for the Air Force, and their organization attracted credentialed scientists, which gave them an air of respectability. Throughout the 1960s and the 1970s, the Lorenzens publicized out-of-this-world stories of human encounters with UFO occupants via their APRO bulletins and their many books. In their book Flying Saucer Occupants, they put forward two theories to explain supposed contact with extraterrestrials. The first was that the objects and their operators are physically real, and the second,
the population of this world is falling victim to a particularly insidious and apparently contagious mental disease, which generates hallucinations involving specific types of airships and humanoids. This disease seems to be spreading. Who will be next to contract the malady? You?
The Lorenzens were fascinated by reports of alien abduction in a time when not all UFO organizations took the idea seriously. They were also early adopters of the practice of hypnotism to help unlock the memories of UFO abductees, and they had many hypnotists among their ranks. Dr. James Harder, their research director, was a trained hypnotist, and Dr. Leo Sprinkle was their consultant in psychology. From the very beginning, ufology was filled with stories of encounters with humanoids and contact with selfless space brothers. But the modern UFO abduction phenomenon gained traction in the 1960s with the case of Betty and Barney Hill.
One of the most famous cases is the one involving this couple, Betty and Barney Hill, who in 1961 not only saw a UFO, but according to hypnotic sessions done 2 years later, under regressive hypnotic analysis, they both told the same story of being taken on board that UFO, physically examined, put back out, told they wouldn't remember what happened, and not remembering what happened.
For years, the couple was haunted by their 2 hours of missing time. Finally, persistent medical problems led them to seek a doctor's advice.
He said, "This sounds like medical amnesia." So he sent us to Dr. Benjamin Simon for hypnosis.
From the very beginning, the Hills were surrounded by a network of military and intelligence characters that seemed determined to make them believe that they were missing 2 hours of their life and that something very strange had happened to them. These people managed to convince the Hills to undergo hypnosis to find out more about what had happened to them, and the results were nothing short of horrifying.
I gotta get my gun. I gotta get my gun!
All right, that's all.
This tape has never before been heard on network television. It's a 1963 recording of Barney Hill being hypnotized, the session that uncovered the first recorded case of alien abduction.
Just stay there, he's saying to me.
All right.
I'll take in my head. Just
All right.
pull the binoculars away. God, give me strength.
All right.
Pull them down. Run!
Pulling the knuckles down and run, God! It says we're God. Give me his hands. I gotta get away. Oh, Betty! All right. We gotta get away, Betty. All right.
I was taken into the first room, Barney into the second room, where we were given, as the leader, as I call him, gave us testing.
I told him, no, it will hurt. Don't do it. Don't do it. And even though it won't hurt. And he takes a nail into my nails. And and I'm crying and I tell him it's hurting, take it out.
While Dr. Simon conceded that the inciting incident, spotting a strange light in the sky, had actually happened, he seemed to chalk almost everything else up to a dream.
Did you conclude that they were actually went aboard a spacecraft, or did you conclude that it was a fantasy?
I concluded that it was, if we make a dream fantasy and fantasy dream, that it was a fantasy, as you put it. In other words, that it was a dream.
But while Dr. Simon may have found the idea of alien abduction and experimentation too out of this world to be real, other psychologists were more than willing to believe.
Dr. Sprinkle is one of the world's leading authorities in cases involving UFOs and human abductions. He has personally worked with 47 people since 1967.
Born in Colorado on August 31st, 1930, Ronald Leo Sprinkle joined the United States Army for 2 years in his youth and was a corporal in the 194th Field Artillery Battalion in Werheim, Germany. He began his education in psychology at Colorado University, and you could almost say that he was born a believer, having experienced strange phenomena as a child.
When I was a child, I had experiences I couldn't understand, explain, nightmares. And later, as I got older, I was able to understand more about what had happened. But consciously, the first event was in 1949 when a buddy and I, at the University of Colorado, we were students there, we had a sighting.
Sprinkle claimed that after a talk on the nature of science and reality, he and his friend had decided to play a game where they would focus on their surroundings and describe what they saw. He recalls focusing on a tree.
And then my friend looked over and said, "What do you see over there?" And what was it? Well, I looked at it. It wasn't an airplane, it wasn't a balloon. It looked elliptical, like a lens, and there was a light gleaming on the edge as if the sunlight was reflecting on it. So we talked about it, but we didn't want to tell anybody else because flying saucers in 1949 weren't readily accepted by the public.
But it was a sighting with his wife that propelled Sprinkle into a life of research into abductions, missing time, and lost memories.
We were coming back from Denver one evening on top of the hill looking over the valley, and we saw this strange light. It would hover and it would move, it would hover and move. Well, it wasn't an airplane. We didn't know what it was. We saw several car lights down below. I assumed other people were stopping like we did and getting out and looking at it. And then after a while it went north and disappeared from view. But the feeling I had inside was, okay, twice now. I've been given an opportunity to see something anomalous.
I knew afterwards, when there wasn't much information publicly, that I had to study the subject and felt it was part of my personal task. I knew it was a good idea to get a doctorate because then I'd only be considered eccentric instead of weird or crazy.
Sprinkle was eventually awarded a PhD in philosophy and counseling psychology from the University of Missouri in 1961. He soon moved to the University of Wyoming, and it was there that he began to flex his ufological muscles. By the mid-1960s, he had joined both NICAP and APRO as a consultant, and he had appeared on national radio broadcasts alongside the Hills. He gave talks on parapsychological research and ESP, as well as teaching self-hypnosis techniques to students and staff at the university.
I teach self-hypnosis to people who wish to learn the techniques, not only to relax the body, but to focus the mind. The task is to assist a person to recognize that within each person is more awareness, more knowledge than he or she may consciously be aware of.
By 1968, he was established enough to serve as a psychological consultant to the Condon Committee at the University of Colorado, the much reviled Air Force-funded investigation into the UFO phenomenon. In 1972, he joined the National Enquirer's Blue Ribbon Panel, a team of experts that included Dr. J. Allen Hynek, assembled for the noble task of evaluating the best UFO cases. There was even a reward of $50,000 for the first person who could prove that a UFO came from out of space. Sprinkle wasn't exactly impartial, and he knew it.
Over the years, I have changed from a scoffer to a skeptic to a believer in the reality of the UFO phenomenon. The reader should be aware of my bias in evaluating my work with other UFO observers and with UFO contactees.
By the 1970s, Sprinkle had hypnotized some of the most famous abductees in ufological history, including, but not limited to, Carl Higdon, Charles Hickson, Herbert Schirmer, Travis Walton, Mona Stafford, and many, many more. While I was researching this documentary, I couldn't believe just how pivotal Leo Sprinkle's hypnosis sessions were in shaping the mythology of the UFO abduction experience. It was his many hypnosis sessions with rancher Pat McGuire that led him to meet Linda Moulton Howe. Linda's fascination with UFOs had begun with a phone call from her brother in October 1975.
Can a phone call change your life? This one quite possibly could.
I had a phone call while I was actually on the floor with a typewriter writing a medical script. And it was my brother, and he was extremely excited. And the first words out of his mouth were, "Linda, a UFO has set down on the base." He was a helicopter pilot in '75 at Malmstrom Air Force Base outside of Great Falls. And that particular night, he had been at a wing party when beepers started going off all over. There was an emergency. And the emergency, as it turned out, was that electronic signal equipment had gone off over a missile silo known as Kilo 7 at Malmstrom. And a sabotage alert team was reporting that a football field size orange glowing disc was hovering, or stationary, whatever word you want to use, very low to the top of the missile silo. Well, the next day, my brother said that they sent a team out there to investigate that missile, and that they found that the targeting information in the computer head about where the warhead would go in the world had been changed. And the next day, they took out that whole missile and put in a new one.
Before fully immersing herself in the strange world of cattle mutilations, UFOs, and government cover-ups, Linda had been the director of special projects at KMGH-TV in Denver. She made films about contaminated drinking water and the dangers of air pollution, serious subjects that made her hard turn into reporting about strange phenomena, somewhat hard to understand. That is, unless you understand her background. Perhaps Linda was always destined for a life in ufology. Her father, Chet, was the director of aeronautics for the state of Idaho, and he was inducted into the state's Aviation Hall of Fame while he was still alive. And her brother, James P. Moulton, worked for the Air Force. Linda says that she almost turned to a career in astronomy but changed her mind at the last minute, opting for a career in journalism that would eventually make her the face of the cattle mutilation mystery.
And was working on a program with a crew in the summer of '79. It was actually behind the scenes of a Colorado Shakespeare Festival, as far from this subject as you could get. And my sound man was talking about the fact that there were mutilations happening in the West. And sure enough, I began realizing that the newspapers had more mutilation stories, and I thought, well, I've got to get to the bottom of this.
After the strange mutilation of Snippy the horse in 1967, public attention had turned to a rash of mysterious cattle deaths across the American Southwest. The animals were found with missing body parts. The tongue, eyes, ears, and most often the sex organs of the animal appeared to have been cut, often with reported surgical precision.
Since 1974, cattle mutilations have been reported in almost every section of Kansas. Some have been blamed on other animals, but the evidence is increasing that at least some of the mutilations have been performed by people. Why and who is responsible?
it's right up here at this area is where I found the cow. Right in this area right here. She was just laying right down close to where that cow is standing.
Glenn Legris is a Sedgwick County cattleman who raises polled Herefords. 3 weeks ago, he found one of his animals dead, the victim of an apparent mutilation. Legris is typical of the many cattlemen across Kansas who have experienced similar situations. Since 1973, from Montana to Texas, cattle mutilations have occurred.
Now, this being the 1970s, the theory that satanic cults armed with knives and a thirst for cow organs were on the loose began to take hold, but some gravitated towards an even more outlandish hypothesis.
Farmers in Ellsbury are counting their herds, but so far no new cases of cattle mutilations have been reported, nor have there been any further sightings of UFOs, which some people feel may be behind the whole bizarre episode.
Linda Moulton Howe became a staunch advocate of the link between UFOs and cattle mutilations while researching and filming her documentary A Strange Harvest.
I guess I find myself in that unusual and unique position of also being one of those people who took the mutilation seriously enough to stick with it long enough that I have found myself becoming an authority in an area that I never would have suspected, the mutilation of animals worldwide.
She'd listened to the many compelling stories from ranchers, members of law enforcement, and scientists, but none were more compelling to her than Judy Doraty.
I think what persuaded me to seriously consider that extraterrestrials were the mutilators was an eyewitness named Judy Doraty.
Back in 1978, Judy Doraty had met with a hypnotist who had been sent to her via APRO. A hypnosis session was conducted and tape recorded, and during the course of it, Judy had seemingly unlocked a memory from that night back in 1973. She claimed to have seen a small animal rising in a pale yellow beam of light into the sky, and it wasn't just any animal, it was a calf. Linda Moulton Howe had managed to get hold of a copy of this tape-recorded hypnosis session via Dr. Leo Sprinkle and APRO. Sprinkle also shared a sketch of a being that Judy had claimed to have seen. She had mailed it to him on September 24th, 1979. With wide-set eyes and the facial structure tapered down to the chin, it had all the hallmarks of a quintessential grey alien. Linda and Leo were determined to explore more of Judy's memories. They wanted to probe further into her recollections, and Linda wanted to include it in her documentary. So together they managed to convince her to undergo hypnosis again, this time in front of Linda's cameraman.
Okay, Judy, as you maintain this deep concentration, this deep relaxation, you can feel yourself going even deeper yet. And as you go deeper and deeper, feeling comfortable and relaxed, allow yourself to go back in time, going back and back in this time of March 1980 to the year 1973, to that particular night in which you and your family members had a sighting that was an unusual event.
Judy's recollections began relatively tamely. She recalled driving home from bingo with her family, spotting a stationary light in the sky and getting out of the car for a closer look. Then she claimed that they drove back to Alta Luma and the light followed them there. When they arrived, everyone in the house rushed outside to get a look at this strange thing in the sky, and Judy said that it actually came towards them. When it got close enough, she said that she could see rows of seats inside the craft and was left with an unusual feeling that unsettled both her and her mother Catherine.
And then it turned like it was straightening up, but it was going very, very slow. And as it passed us, it was treetop level. It angled like it was going to land, like it was going lower in the sky. But all the kids took off running into the pasture, and the only thing I could think was I was afraid they were going to get snake bit. And I yelled at them to come back, but they got fairly close to it. And then it just straightened up from the angle it was on to just straight. And then it just shot straight up into the sky and stayed right up next to the moon like a star. And it went from very, very big to very, very little in a matter of seconds. And everybody just seemed really amazed. And we all talked about it. And we kept coming back out and looking up at the sky and it would still be there. Almost like it was looking at us, looking at them.
From a skeptical perspective, it sounded almost dreamlike, the fusion of a somewhat run-of-the-mill sighting in the sky with other, more hazy memories. But of course, Leo Sprinkle and Linda Moulton Howe were determined to take Judy deeper, to prod her memories of the cow that she had seen rising into a beam of light. The session picks up again with Judy standing outside her car.
Now you're standing outside your car. Now you're looking up. You can describe your impressions. What are your impressions?
It's like a spotlight that's shining down on the back of my car. And it's like it has substance to it. I can see an animal being taken up in this. I can see it squirming and trying to get free. And it's like it's being sucked up. It's taken into some sort of chamber. It's a little round, tiny room. And I get nauseated at watching how they excise parts. It's done very quickly, but the calf doesn't die immediately. For some reason, the calf's heart isn't taken, and I don't know. It seems like it's still living, and that upset me very much. And then I can see the calf being lowered. It's like it's being dropped back down. And when it's on the ground, it's dead. I can see that it's not moving. But I feel very sick to my stomach at what I witnessed.
Although the memory of this strange event had seemingly been locked away somewhere within the recesses of Judy's mind, here she was under a hypnotic trance, recalling the details that had previously been kept from her. She had entered unconscious territory, and now she was reporting back from behind enemy lines the vivid images of what had happened to her. But what if those memories, as real as they felt to her in that moment, couldn't fully be trusted? And what if the people around her, motivated by their own complex beliefs, couldn't be trusted either? Before we go any further, I think it's important to state my position up front. I want to talk about the nature of repressed memories, a highly controversial and much debated topic. And it would be irresponsible of me to present this section without telling you my own stance. Personally, I believe that repressed memories are very real, and that complex PTSD can affect the mind in ways that we don't always fully understand. It's a strange form of traumatic amnesia that dissociates you from yourself. You can listen to people recollect about the past, your past, and yet you have no memory of it at all, almost as if you're hearing about a complete stranger. I also believe that occasionally people can retrieve previously repressed memories via different forms of therapy or conscious recall. Hypnotic regression is one of the tools commonly used to unlock a memory buried in the unconscious mind. But, and here's the big caveat, the eye of the storm in the debate that has raged for decades now, memories recovered via hypnosis are not reliable, and they can often be influenced by the hypnotist themselves. That's not to say that whatever anybody says while they're under hypnosis, or if they've uncovered a memory, should be totally dismissed outright, but without any other evidence to support them, memories unlocked with hypnotic regression should be taken with a truckload of salt. So, with that being said, let's begin.
I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
So we're going to start with this guy, Sigmund Freud, and I'll let him explain himself.
I started as a neurologist trying to bring relief to my neurotic patients. I discovered some important new facts about the unconscious, the role of instinctual urges, and so on.
While developing his theory of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud came to believe that repression was the root of his patients' suffering, what he called their neuroses. He believed that traumatic events from early childhood could be repressed from the conscious mind as a defense mechanism, while also leaving a permanent mark on the unconscious and eventually impacting adult behavior. This repression could cause physical and mental ailments, manifesting itself in a variety of different ways. In the words of Freud himself, the essence of repression lies simply in turning something away and keeping it at a distance from the conscious. This is where the concept of a Freudian slip comes from.
What's a Freudian slip?
Well, that's when you say one thing when you're actually thinking about a mother.
Freud developed what would come to be known as the seduction theory after treating 18 patients and discovering that all of them had been victims of childhood sexual assault. The repressed memories were supposedly the key to understanding the mental illness that was plaguing them in adult life. But Freud soon dropped the seduction theory and began to speculate that what he had really uncovered in these patients was unconscious desires from their childhoods. From this, he developed theories on psychosexual development and the Oedipus complex, effectively dismissing the allegations of sexual assault in favour of a more palatable story, one that centred the child and made them responsible. Freud would use hypnosis on his patients, writing in 1893 that,
"As a rule, it is necessary to hypnotize the patient and to arouse his memories under hypnosis of the time at which the symptom made its first appearance. When this has been done, it becomes possible to demonstrate the connection in the clearest and most convincing fashion."
Freud would later abandon the use of hypnosis, due in part to concerns about the nature of the relationship between patient and hypnotist, and he would eventually label hypnosis as a tyranny of suggestion. But while he may have moved on to new pastures, the use of the practice in recovering memories was only just beginning.
Your eyelids are getting very, very heavy, Joe. You are beginning to feel yourself slipping into the hypnotic state.
While hypnosis technically has its roots in the 18th century occultic practice of mesmerism, it was Scottish surgeon James Braid that actually coined the term in 1842. Since its inception, there has been disagreement amongst hypnotists as to what it actually is. Some argue that people really do enter into a hypnotic trance, and that while in this altered state of consciousness, they become extremely susceptible to suggestions. Some of the people that believe in this kind of altered state of hypnosis also believe that it is impossible for a patient to lie while they're in a hypnotic state. Now, others argue that this altered state doesn't actually exist at all, and that what is actually occurring is a complex role play between the hypnotist and the subject. For example, if the subject knows what is expected of them, then they will often try to please the hypnotist by playing along, sometimes without even meaning to. James Braid was no fan of the mesmerists. He railed against the idea that there was a hidden occult force that they were harnessing, and instead sought to replicate the act of mesmerism for himself.
Disliking the connotations of the term mesmerism, he adopted de Cuvier's term hypnotism and hypnotist, becoming the first to use these words in English. He explained in his first book that, "I have now entirely separated hypnotism from animal magnetism. I consider it to be merely a simple, speedy, and certain mode of throwing the nervous system into a new condition, which may be rendered eminently available in the cure of certain disorders.
The use of hypnosis in a medical setting continued throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century. It was used in the American Civil War as a way of managing pain amongst soldiers, but arguably its most widespread and influential use came with World War I, World War II, and the Korean War, with the treatment of PTSD.
Hypnosis is often effective in certain types of battle neuroses, such as amnesia. This man does not even remember his own name. A shell burst in Okinawa wiped out his memory. The experience was unendurable to his conscious mind, which rejected it, and along with it his entire past. Through hypnotic suggestion, the psychiatrist will attempt to evoke them.
Hypnosis seemed to be touted as a one-stop shop that could cure almost any ailment, from complex psychological issues to physical disabilities. And if hypnosis was truly that powerful, then perhaps it could be used for less than honourable means.
Throw all of your normal law-abiding concepts out of the window. Here's a chance to raise merry hell. It was in this atmosphere that the search for mind control began.
From the late 1940s, hypnosis was experimented with by the CIA. There was Project Bluebird, Project Artichoke, and, eventually, MKUltra. While the spectre of military intelligence is forever looming over the field of ufology, I'm going to save the deep dive into CIA involvement in both hypnosis and UFO abductions for the next installment of this series, where we will explore in detail people like Martin Orne, Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter, and many more. So while it's not explicitly mentioned in this video, make no mistake that while the 1950s saw the approval of hypnosis in medical settings for the general public, the CIA were working to utilize it for their own nefarious purposes, some of which would have found them aligned with many UFO researchers. While the CIA were busy using hypnosis in the development of interrogation techniques and behaviour modification, the general public were given a much more sanitised and appealing use for the procedure, namely self-help. Professor Robert Genter writes that in the mid-20th century, popular culture helped to normalise therapeutic treatment, and that out of this cultural shift re-emerged the practice of hypnotism.
Manuals on hypnotism in the 1950s sold alongside other best-selling self-help books such as Norman Vincent Peale's The Art of Real Happiness, Harry Overstreet's The Mature Mind, and Lucy Freeman's Fight Against Fears. Hypnotism was the practical, inexpensive, and secular version of these more prominent religious and metaphysical movements, bearing a strong resemblance to the power of positive thinking.
While Freud had given up the practice in favour of what he called free association by the late 1800s, it seemed that an entirely new generation had begun to sing the praises of hypnotism, and it soon became re-entwined with its occult roots.
I, Virginia Tighe, underwent a unique experiment some 15 years ago. While in a hypnotic trance, I recreated intimate details of the life of a young girl who was born in County Cork, Ireland in 1798. Fantastic as it may seem, I felt that I had lived another life. I remembered my family in Ireland, the school I attended, the specific grocery store where I traded, and the prayer I used to recite before meals. I even was able to draw an accurate map of where I lived 150 years ago. And when I talked, I spoke with a genuine Irish brogue, using old-fashioned words no longer common today. You may remember my other name, Bridie Murphy. Signed, Virginia Tighe.
The social phenomenon of Bridie Murphy catapulted regressive hypnosis into the spotlight in the mid-20th century. Virginia's sessions had begun in 1952 when she met amateur hypnotist Maury Bernstein, who regressed her beyond her childhood to an entirely different life. He eventually published her story in a book, The Search for Bridie Murphy, in 1956, and it was lauded as a parapsychological classic by the New York Times, remaining on their bestseller list for 6 months. The film adaptation was released that same year.
When you were in that lifetime as Bridie Murphy, did you have any particular talent? Could you play the piano? Did you like to go dancing?
I like to go dancing.
Virginia's story, though still believed by many to this day, would later be debunked as a product of cryptomnesia, a forgotten memory believed to be new by the person remembering it. As it turned out, Virginia had actually lived opposite an Irish immigrant named Bridie Murphy Corkle as a child, and this seemed to provide the direct inspiration for her hypnotic alter ego. But while the story may have been inherently flawed, its impact on popularizing hypnosis amongst the general public was undebatable. In 1958, just 2 years after Bridie Murphy burst onto the scene, the American Medical Association formally recognized hypnosis as a form of legitimate therapeutic treatment. This only bolstered its already growing popularity in the media, alongside the emergence of parapsychology and ESP, and the 1960s gave rise to a number of celebrity hypnotists.
This is Kreskin, an expert on ESP.
In a series of TV experiments, Kreskin exposed the suggestibility of people while under hypnosis. In one incident, he even used the topic of UFOs.
When I walk outside, the moment I drop a handkerchief, you will all hear a tremendous noise in the sky outdoors. You will look up in the sky and you will all see vividly, as clear and as real as can be, 3 flying saucers scooting through the sky. You will actually see 3 flying saucers scooting through the sky as vividly as can be. You'll comment on them. You'll want to talk about them.
You think there might be?
Oh, sure.
How about you, sir? Do you believe in flying saucers? I believe the possibility of them, and I'd love to see one. What?
I see something red up there.
A flying saucer. Can you see that? Three of them. Red and gold, and you know, did you see it? Where? It's got what on it? Right there. Can you see them?
3 red, and they're following one another. No, it's
what do you see there? Something red. I don't know what.
Look, it's green.
Look at it. What does it look like?
Right, they're right up there. They're flying around.
But can this power of suggestion be used for positive ends to enable people to do something they want to, but can't? An example is the use of hypnosis as an investigative tool in law enforcement.
This is a special report from CBS News. The 26 school children and their bus driver who disappeared in Chowchilla, California, have been found alive and well in a rock quarry. The children and their driver had disappeared Thursday as they were being driven home from school.
While hypnosis had been used as an investigative tool in earlier decades, it was the 1976 kidnapping of 26 children and their bus driver in Chowchilla, California, that catapulted the practice into the mainstream. After digging their way to freedom, the hunt began for their kidnappers, and it eventually culminated in bus driver Ed Ray being hypnotized and remembering the license plate on the kidnapper's van.
In hypnosis, Ed Ray was able to produce 2 series of license numbers. One series, with the exception of a digit, matched a license plate number jotted down by a suspicious neighbor who lived in the area of the rock quarry.
That same year, Eugene Block released his book, Hypnosis, a New Tool in Crime Detection, and soon it seemed that every cop and his dog was dabbling with hypnotism. It appeared at police conferences, and departments across the United States had their own teams of hypnotechnicians. The newfound approval and legitimacy for hypnosis, as short-lived as it may have been, made it even more appealing to the burgeoning subculture of ufology.
Hypnosis, then, is accepted as a valid tool by both courts and police departments. Properly used, the technique can be an avenue to truth, particularly so when traumatic events have buried specific details beyond immediate recall.
Contrary to Bud Hopkins' view of hypnosis, Terence Hines was quick to point out in his book, Pseudoscience and the Paranormal, hypnosis is used in crime situations only after several non-hypnotic sessions have been conducted with the witness to try to retrieve more details from memory.
In my opinion, it gained popularity because it was easy to use, it was cost effective, and it provided a great deal of otherwise non-existent evidence for UFO cases.
In 2015, Jack Brewer wrote The Greys Have Been Framed, Exploitation in the UFO Community, which explored the decades worth of documented psychological malpractice that had taken place in the name of extraterrestrial investigation.
You're talking about an era that if someone had an organization with a title and sent investigators out, the public was conditioned to kind of feel like that in itself meant they were qualified and that they must be professional.
Jack immersed himself in this growing UFO community, and what he found was downright terrifying.
Emily, there were people, like if you went to MUFON meetings, then you knew people that were hypnotists. Like you could just find somebody that would help you explore your purported memories. And I have sat in a MUFON meeting in the community room of a bagel shop in Central Florida, where the facilitator conducted group hypnosis to help the attendees recall their UFO sightings and circumstances with purported aliens.
Perhaps this was happening because of the legitimized nature of hypnosis at the time. In her book Aliens in America, Judy Dean writes that hypnosis took on the double function of helping cure the traumatic loss of memory, as well as providing scientific evidence, because of its medical role, of the truth of what is recalled. Law enforcement was using it, medical institutions were using it, hell, even the CIA were using it. So why not use it to uncover the mysteries of whether or not we're really alone, and whether we've been visited by non-human intelligence? What could possibly go wrong?
One thing that has become extremely clear historically is that hypnosis is not just a poor tool for investigating and understanding anomalous experience. It's actually an extremely bad and often potentially dangerous tool.
This is Mark Pilkington, writer of the must-read book Mirage Men, in which he explores military intelligence involvement in the weird world of UFOs, as well as the possibility that some of the earliest UFO abduction stories could have been complex psychological operations.
The general feeling amongst people who have devoted a big chunk of their life to studying UFOs, I think, is fear that they have been taken for a ride, that these cases are hoaxes, but sophisticated hoaxes carried out by their own government.
While I've avoided interrogating possible military involvement in abduction cases in this video, I want to mention it because at the core of that theory is the very real concern over deliberately implanted false memories.
Even if you could trust the memories that are being recovered from subjects, and I don't think you really can, unless you're absolutely sure that the person conducting the hypnotic regression is totally neutral and impartial, then it just shouldn't be happening. And the sad truth is almost nobody, certainly if they're uncovering, UFO abductions or cattle mutilations, people are only there because of they've got a prior interest and often a prior motive.
While much has been written on the possibility of hypnosis subjects recovering memories of events that never happened, people often seem to overlook the role that hypnotists have played throughout history when it comes to planting false memories. In his paper Hypnotic Regression and False Memories, Christopher C. French writes,
"The first clear example of the use of hypnosis to deliberately implant a false memory occurred back in the 1880s. French physician Hippolyte Bernheim successfully implanted a memory in his patient Marie that she had witnessed an old man raping a young girl. She subsequently gave a detailed account of the suggested event, insisting that it had really taken place, and even expressing a willingness to testify under oath if required."
What we're learning is that memory is really quite a flexible thing. The mind does not work at all like a computer in the sense of reproducing memory inputs with perfection.
Correct.
And we've had that analogy now for many years of the mind as a video camera, and that all we have to do is stop and play back the images that have been incorporated into our minds through years of experience. And what we're finding out is that that's not an accurate representation at all. That in fact memory is very prone to many kinds of errors, and errors through suggestion are just one type.
Now, over the years, a lot has been written about the concept of false memories, and there's nobody quite as well known and controversial as Dr. Elizabeth Loftus. She boldly declared that repressed memories were a myth and that recovered memories weren't to be trusted, a position that many people, survivors of childhood abuse included, disagree with. Throughout her many books, Loftus has put forward a compelling argument that memory is malleable, that it doesn't necessarily work like an internalized hall of records that one can pull from under the right circumstances.
One of the things that I and other people who do similar work have shown is that once you have an experience and you record it in memory, it doesn't just stick there in some pristine form, waiting to be played back like a recording device, but rather new information, new ideas, new thoughts, suggestive information, misinformation can enter people's conscious awareness and cause a contamination, a distortion, an alteration in memory.
While her research clearly showed that memory could be manipulated, she seemingly had no problem working with the manipulators herself. Her work was pivotal in the creation of the False Memory Foundation, established by Pam and Peter Freyd after their daughter Jennifer accused Peter of childhood sexual abuse. Importantly, a claim that was corroborated by several other family members. Indeed, it seemed that Loftus and the newly founded False Memory Foundation were invested in discrediting victims. She sat on the scientific advisory board alongside Ralph Underwager, who literally defended paedophiles in court and personally advocated for paedophilia himself, as well as at least 2 scientists who had been involved in the CIA's MKUltra program, Jolly West and Martin Orne. While Jennifer Freyd went on to devote her life to passionately advocating for victims of abuse, Loftus charged $600 an hour as a witness in the defense of people like Harvey Weinstein, Ted Bundy, Ghislaine Maxwell, and many, many more. Loftus placed herself on the front lines of the so-called memory wars, and her research has been consistently used to discount and deride the testimony of potential victims as unreliable, despite some researchers like Ross Chait making a compelling argument that the skepticism surrounding recovered memories went too far. It was an overcorrection that actually ended up denying real abuse. While I think that Loftus's research on false memories is important enough to mention in the context of hypnosis, she seemed to use that research to discredit any and all recovered memories, not just those uncovered by an overzealous hypnotist.
If you convince someone falsely that they were victims or that they had some horrible experience, and they now believe in this false experience, they can feel very emotional about it. My boy. And they may cry, they may scream, they may tremble, they may feel terrible, but it's a feeling terrible about a false memory that they've now adopted for themselves.
It's a strange way to word it, and it almost puts the onus back on the patient. They haven't adopted it for themselves. It's often been planted in their mind by someone that they trusted, and someone that abused that trust while they were at their most vulnerable. For hypnosis to work, the patient must be somewhat susceptible to suggestion, and Terence Hines writes that the entire practice of hypnosis greatly increases a hypnotized subject's confidence that their hypnotically induced memories are true.
If you've seen a UFO, though, and people come to your home, or you meet with them at a bagel shop or whatever the case may be, and they start asking you things like, did you feel weird afterward? Did you have any distortions? That are simple, like yes and no, closed-ended questions. Instead of asking you to describe what happened, even if they're not aware that they suffer from confirmation bias, they're taking you to a predetermined spot where there was something going on about, and they're glancing at each other knowingly as you're saying yes and things like that. And that was rampant, just rampant in the latter 20th century.
It was rampant in Freud's time too. In the book Making Monsters, the writers detail how Freud overcame strong resistance in his patients and ultimately manipulated their beliefs to confirm his own theories.
One of Freud's motivations, and perhaps his key rationalization for his manipulation of his patients, came from his belief that he was revealing the dark truths of human nature for the first time in history.
One of the qualities about this that's inherent to the people involved is that they seem to think they're on the greatest mystery of all time, and there's some kind of urgency, and they're going to prove something and share it with the world.
So could it be that the hypnotists and researchers that Judy Doraty and others had placed their trust in were blinded in their quest for answers to one of the greatest modern mysteries?
What are these silent lights that leave dead and mutilated animals in pastures?
So much so that they inadvertently ended up giving themselves the answer.
'Cause now it's Judy's turn to cry, Judy's turn to cry, Judy's turn to cry.
On October 21st, 1978, Dr. Rose Tennant was on her way to the home of Judy Doraty. After spending 12 years working in pathology, Rose had become disheartened with traditional medicine and had stopped reading medical journals, opting instead to work with what she called integrative medicine. She opened her own private practice, specializing in relaxation therapy, biofeedback and hypnosis, after her own spiritual awakening.
I've seen changes in myself. I am less striving. I see beauty in the present. So many of us live in the past or in the future that we don't take advantage of the present, don't enjoy the present. I have withdrawn from the rat race.
Her work with hypnosis in Arizona had brought her to the attention of APRO, specifically to Louis E. Doraty. It's spelt different, but it sounds the same. And he was a member of the APRO board of directors based in Tucson.
One of the most interesting aspects of the UFO syndrome is the recurrence of reports of abductions of Earthlings by aliens from outer space. One of the oldest organizations involved in an investigation of abductions is the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, headquartered in Tucson, Arizona.
I can only speculate about how Dr. Tennant met APRO, but considering her interest in alternative medicine and hypnosis, it doesn't really surprise me that she eventually found herself working with an organization that investigated supposed UFO abductions. In 1978, the Doraty family were actually stationed in military housing in Yuma, Arizona. Judy's husband James had recently returned from Vietnam.
12,000 years ago, in the lower Colorado River Valley, ancient hunters navigated by sightings of Castle Dome Peak. Ancient sayings held that the peak sees all valleys, and all valleys see the peak. Today, the peak also sees one of the Defense Department's most modern test centers, the U.S. Army's Yuma Proving Ground.
Considering the amount of military personnel that APRO corresponded with and had in their organisation itself, it's not surprising that Judy had heard about them and considered them to be the right organisation to contact about her strange sighting back in 1973. And so, Dr. Rose Tennant and Louis Doraty, along with his wife, arrived at Judy's home, ready to go over what happened in extensive detail. So here's where things get interesting, as if they weren't already. Back in the summer of 2023, I interviewed the notable cattle mutilation researcher Christopher O'Brien, who sadly passed away while I was making this documentary. In the course of our conversation, the Judy Doraty case came up. What do you think of the Judy Doraty and then later the Myrna Hansen? Because to me, they highlight the issues with hypnotic regression.
Well, first of all, Judy Doraty said that she saw a cat get sucked up.
Hang on a minute. A cat? I thought we was talking about a bloody cow.
Not a calf.
This wasn't in the transcript of her later hypnosis session with Leo Sprinkle. It wasn't in the documentary A Strange Harvest either. So logically, it could have only occurred during this first hypnosis session with APRO. I quickly got to work trying to find the evidence, and thanks to the digitization of years worth of bulletins put out by APRO themselves, I managed to find a partial transcript of that hypnosis session, the one that was tape recorded and sent to Linda Moulton Howe. In the newsletter, APRO doesn't identify the people involved and instead uses Mrs. D and Dr. T as their names. But it's obvious that it's Judy Doraty and Rose Tennant. The following is a reenactment.
It's so perfect inside. Everything in there is just perfect, but they're different.
If after you wake up, will you be willing to draw a picture of the UFO as best you can?
Yes, but there's an animal there.
An animal? What does it look like?
It's an animal that... It's like there... Isn't that something?
Where is the animal?
It's like it's... Oh goodness, I don't know how to explain it. It's like it's floating underneath it.
Could you draw a picture of that?
It's like this... Isn't that something?
Can you tell me what kind of animal it is?
It's just...
Does it look like anything you can describe?
That's what it is. I know what it is. It's a laboratory. That's what it is. That's exactly what it is. It's a laboratory. I can see it. I know.
Is the animal in the laboratory?
I saw an animal in the laboratory.
What kind of an animal?
I don't know if it's a cat or something like a cat.
What color is it?
It's kind of tan.
Was it on a table?
That's what they're doing. They're cutting it up. That's exactly what it is.
Is it by any chance a cow or a calf?
That's probably what it is. That's what it is. That thing floated up that thing floated up there.
Is it by any chance a cow?
There it was, the evidence that I had been looking for. The evidence that clearly showed an APRO hypnotist suggesting to a patient in a hypnotic state that what they actually saw was a cow.
Oh, you mean a calf? No, I mean a cat. No, you mean a calf, right? Yeah, okay, whatever. A calf.
I couldn't believe it, and I had to tell Jack about it too. The hypnotist asked her, what kind of an animal? Judy Doraty says, I don't know if it's a cat or something like a cat. And then she says that they're cutting it up on a table. And then the hypnotist says, is it by any chance a cow or a calf? Can you believe that?
I can completely believe that. I shouldn't laugh. It's not funny. I think that's why I laugh. It's so disturbing.
The transcript formed part of an article written by Coral Lorenzen titled UFOs and Mutilations and was used as evidence to prove the link between the two of them. But Judy never organically spoke about a cow. Dr. Rose Tennant, at the very least, made a suggestion to Judy while she was in a highly suggestible hypnotic state. It makes me wonder if Dr. Tennant and APRO had arrived that October morning with a specific goal in mind: find evidence for the link between UFOs and cattle mutilations, and find it at any cost.
I think certain individuals out there in the research community will go to amazing lengths to come up with details that conform to their foregone conclusions. And the Doraty description of the animal that was sucked up into the craft is a classic example of wanting your cake and making sure it's frosted so you can eat it too.
It also makes me wonder whether Linda Moulton Howe had been aware of this suggestive memory and had concealed the origins of the hypnotic regression itself. Strangely, in her books An Alien Harvest and Glimpses of Other Realities, Linda writes that Judy shared the hypnosis tape with APRO, but that's not true. The hypnosis session was conducted by APRO themselves. themselves, with an APRO-affiliated hypnotist and investigator present, after being contacted by Judy Doraty herself.
And when you're someone like a Linda Howe who's just starting out in this realm, having been there myself, you tend to really want things to line up and correlate, and you tend to be excitable. You tend to be easily convinced that you've figured it out. As soon as you make up your mind that something is one way, you're going to have blinders on, and you're going to be looking for the data to support your foregone conclusion.
In this short excerpt of a 4-hour hypnosis session, there are more clear examples of leading and suggesting. Firstly, if you're using hypnosis as an investigative tool to try and decipher what a subject may or may not have seen, I'm not sure if it's a good idea to expressly mention the word UFO.
If after you wake up, will you be willing to draw a picture of the UFO as best you can?
From what I can tell, Judy was describing what she saw, and Dr. Tennant was the one that called it a UFO. While some may say that all she meant was an unidentified flying object, I would argue that for many, the word UFO brings vivid science fiction-filled images to mind first, versus an innocuous light in the sky. There was also the suggestion of a table being involved, which then leads to the recollection of something being cut up.
Was it on a table?
That's what they're doing. They're cutting it up. That's exactly what it is.
Then there is the suggestion of where this was all taking place. While I'm sure that Judy had previously stated that it had happened on a road on the way back from bingo, Dr. Tennant mentions a pasture, which gives credence to Dr. Tennant's earlier suggestion of a cow.
That's probably what it is. That's what it is. That thing floated up that thing floated up there.
Out of the pasture by the roadside.
This is when we were stopped.
Uh-huh. This is on the road.
Another important point to note about this hypnosis session is that Judy Doraty claims to be outside the craft, and she said that although she saw this strange alien laboratory, she was never actually inside it.
Do you think you were inside the laboratory?
I don't think so. But that's what they did.
Without the full transcript or an actual tape recording of the hypnosis session, it's hard to tell how it ended. From what I can ascertain, Judy walked away from her first hypnosis session without thinking that she was an abductee, but the images stayed with her. After her session, her headaches and migraines continued, along with the feeling that she had been told something important, but just couldn't remember. Between her first hypnosis in 1978 and her second in 1980 with Dr. Leo Sprinkle and Linda Moulton Howe, Judy had unlocked a few memories by herself. It was during this time that she mailed the sketch of what can only be described as a classic grey alien to Dr. Leo Sprinkle, presumably getting his address from the people she had been in contact with at APRO. So let me just bring you up to speed on where we're at, because I know that this is a lot. In 1973, Judy saw a strange light in the sky on her way home with her family. In the years that followed, while her husband was stationed in Vietnam, she was plagued with nightmares, headaches, and a feeling that there was something she was not quite remembering. Then, in 1978, she reaches out to APRO and undergoes her first ever hypnotism, where Dr. Rose Tennant suggests that Judy may have seen a cow being taken inside a UFO. Around the same time, Dr. Leo Sprinkle begins working with Linda Moulton Howe, who is investigating the cattle mutilation mystery and its supposed connection to UFOs. He sends her the tape of the hypnosis session with Dr. Tennant, along with the drawing of an alien being, which immediately grabs Linda's attention. And so that brings us back to March 13th, 1980, and the hypnosis session with Dr. Leo Sprinkle, facilitated by Linda Moulton Howe. This time, it was captured on video, and after recalling the elements of the story that we've all become familiar with by now, Judy began to recall even more terrifying details.
You see the animal being cut up?
Yes. How's it being cut up?
Dissected.
Mm-hmm. With knives?
Instruments of some kind.
Mm-hmm. Can you describe the instruments?
They're like a knife, but they have different kind of handles. More like a razor doesn't have movable parts, but like a straight razor type.
Judy is guided to give a detailed description of what can only be described as an alien abattoir. There was blood in tubes, animal parts in vats, basins filled with testicles and eyeballs, and animal tissues laid out with needles stuck in it. Reading the transcript of the 4-hour session, it's plainly obvious that Sprinkle wants to extract as much information from Doraty as possible, even down to the height of the rooms and the size of the chairs and tables inside the floating alien laboratory.
Is anybody else around you?
I feel the presence of other things, but I don't know what they are. I can't see them.
Mm-hmm. You feel you're standing by the side of the road, by your car now, or are you standing someplace else now?
I feel in two places at once.
Mm-hmm. Okay, describe how you feel.
I feel like that I was able to see what was going on in the craft, but I was also standing beside the road.
While I was trying to compare the hypnosis session that we see in the documentary A Strange Harvest and the transcript that Linda Moulton Howe printed in the appendix of her book An Alien Harvest, I noticed some serious issues. After Judy says that she was standing beside the road and that she felt like she was in two places at once, Sprinkle goes on to say,
"Okay, now just picture yourself standing there. You are inside now. And there are two of them? Is that right? Or are there more?"
I only see two.
Now you're probably thinking, what's the issue, Emily? What are you banging on about? Well, let me tell you. The issue with this is that Judy never mentioned that there were two people before Sprinkle asked her the question.
And there are two of them?
I'm being serious. I read through this whole transcript. I keyword searched it as well. And nowhere before that moment does she mention two beings. She only mentions feeling as if she was in two places at once. But here's where it gets even more strange. In the documentary, we actually see Judy talking about two little men.
It appears to be two little men.
Two little men? Mm-hmm. How do they look?
Their hands look funny. They have long claw nails, like. They have very large eyes. They're very hypnotic. Like, they're so big that, and they don't blink. Their eyes do not blink. It's almost like, a snake.
But that part of Judy's testimony doesn't appear anywhere in the printed transcript. There's nothing about hypnotic snake-like eyes, and for a moment I felt like I was going mad until I realised why it might have been left out. Now this is pure speculation on my part, but let's say that Dr. Leo Sprinkle introduced two little men into this session at some point during its 4-hour duration, much like Dr. Tennant before him had introduced a cow. You can kind of see why Linda Moulton Howe may have chosen to exclude that from the transcript, perhaps painfully aware that the original hypnosis had been tainted by suggestion and afraid that this session, this smoking gun, would be tainted too. It doesn't make sense to me why such an important part of the hypnosis session, the literal description of what these beings look like, was left out. But again, this is pure speculation. There are other parts of the hypnosis transcript where it simply says Leo does more relaxation techniques with Judy, and I've got no idea what they are. So this got me wondering whether there were any other cases where Dr. Leo Sprinkle may have led or suggested images to his patients while they were under hypnosis, and I didn't have to look very far to find one. A few months after hypnotizing Judy, writers Daniel Kagan and Ian Summers were working on their book Mute Evidence, a comprehensive study of the cattle mutilation mystery.
The two journalists, Daniel Kagan and Ian Summers, were on the ground covering the story from almost the very beginning, and they saw exactly what was going on. What you find is that the UFO activists and believers and promoters just move in and take over. Essentially, they kind of squat the field, as it were, and try to make it part of their own nexus of beliefs, and and they kind of use it to expand upon and compound their own beliefs in this case in extraterrestrials.
In the process of their research, they met with Dr. Sprinkle, and Daniel Kagan even went so far as to be hypnotized by him. During the hypnosis session, Kagan recalled a recurring dream from his childhood of being suspended in the air over a large bridge. Sprinkle guided him to imagine crossing the bridge in a vehicle, any kind that he liked. When Kagan eventually told Sprinkle that he'd feel safer in an aircraft, Sprinkle said,
"Imagine yourself in a spacecraft."
Kagan had never mentioned a spacecraft, and yet here was Leo Sprinkle saying those words in the middle of a hypnosis session that had nothing to do with a spacecraft. Kagan even confronted him on it.
"Leo, you tried to insert a flying saucer into my dream when there was none."
According to the recollections in the book, Sprinkle smiled and shrugged his shoulders. While I haven't been able to find any other explicitly clear examples of Sprinkle leading his patients, that doesn't mean that they don't exist. Reading the transcript of his hypnosis session with Judy Doraty felt like being privy to an interrogation. There was so much pushing and prodding that I was reminded of something that Elena Blavatsky once wrote, where she said that the amateur hypnotists of science vivisected the souls of man with as much unconcern as they vivisect the bodies of rabbits and dogs.
I don't know how to make this case any more than I have, Emily, that qualified professionals tell us that hypnosis and memory retrieval techniques are unreliable, that they may be able to jog the memory about certain things, but they are not reliable as objective reality. And we can show again where hypnosis advocates have exploited their subjects. If that's not good enough for people, I don't know how to describe this any more ways.
Another strange piece of information came out of Judy's hypnosis session, namely that the beings she was encountering were conducting tests on the animals, concerned about pollution and potential nuclear waste involving plutonium.
And it has to do with somehow nuclear waste or testing or causing a change in the chemical composition of something.
Okay, just be aware of what is being said.
But I don't understand what that means. I don't understand. Trying to understand, but I don't.
In the spring of 1979, Karen Silkwood's family brought a lawsuit against energy company Kerr-McGee.
The suit charged that Kerr-McGee was negligent in letting plutonium escape from its Cimarron nuclear plant. Karen Silkwood was a lab worker at the plant, but it was at her Edmond apartment that she was contaminated in November of 1974. A week after the contamination incident, Silkwood died when her car ran off Highway 74 and crashed. The Highway Patrol called it an accident. Silkwood supporters call it a mystery. The lawsuit came to trial on March 6th this year. Experts testified about the dangers of plutonium. Some said Karen Silkwood would surely have died from cancer because of her exposure to the radioactive metal.
Around the same time, there was the 3 Mile Island incident.
For many years, there has been a vigorous debate in this country about the safety of the nation's 72 nuclear energy power plants. That debate is likely to be intensified because of what happened early this morning at a nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania. Max?
Frank, it was an accident at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant, which is located on an island in the Susquehanna River, 10 miles from Harrisburg. A cooling pump broke down, and the plant did just what it was supposed to do, shut itself off. But not before some radioactivity had escaped.
While I'm not discounting that Judy's experiences under hypnosis were very real to her, I do think it's important to understand what the world looked like at the time. These two stories captured global attention and rightly caused concern over nuclear safety. It wouldn't surprise me if that had stayed in Judy Doraty's mind, the anxiety potentially manifesting itself under hypnosis. Towards the end of her session, Sprinkle asked Judy to bring her awareness to who was in the car.
My mother is in the front seat. My brother-in-law Jerry is in the back with his wife Judy, and that's all.
That's all. Okay, where is Cindy?
I don't know. I don't believe she came with us.
This was odd too, because at the beginning of the session, she had said that Cindy was in the car. But now, towards the end of the 4 hours of interrogation, Cindy was suddenly missing. Leo Sprinkle instructed her to go to a very deep stage in her subconscious to try and remember where Cindy was, eventually allowing Judy to recall seeing Cindy in the backseat of the car. Firstly, Judy remembers her on the right side, and then on the left.
Okay, just let yourself relax deeply now. Let yourself relax and picture yourself driving along. See everybody in the car. Cindy's on the left. What happens next?
I just can't remember. I remember seeing the light and pulling over, but I can't remember. Cindy's there 1 minute and then she's gone the next, and I can't bring it out.
You can be aware of yourself standing by the side of the car. You can be aware of yourself standing in the craft. And now let yourself be aware of where Cindy is.
I know I have a feeling of fear.
Okay, let yourself go on through the experience. Let yourself go on through the fear. What impressions come to mind?
I just visualize her on a table.
Okay, what happens next?
I am afraid that it's going to happen to her, what they did to the animal.
Yeah. Just let yourself relax.
Forget it. No, I don't want to.
You can tolerate it. You know it.
No, I can't.
You know it's all right. Just let yourself go on through. Just relax deeply. You know that everything's going to be okay. You see Cindy on the table. What happens next?
I'm just afraid that they're going to hurt us.
My mama didn't lie. She didn't lie.
While the alien abduction phenomenon had been around for decades, the 1980s saw a huge surge in cases.
Mention you've seen a UFO, and millions will defend you. But tell people you were abducted by space aliens, and they're likely to call for the white coats.
1 out of 40 Americans believe that they've undergone an experience that science cannot explain. Skeptics argue that they may be suffering from some sort of a shared psychosis. But what can explain the startling similarities among so many cases, the hundreds of unexplainable scars and bruises, the identical descriptions of extraterrestrials, the common accounts of alien medical procedures?
They came into the house in the middle of the night, and they physically took me out of the house. With me being paralyzed and having a confused memory of it the next morning.
What he eventually remembered, Whitley Strieber put into a book, Communion. It became a bestseller.
But everyone who will read the book will be very skeptical. You can
I
understand
don't
that.
agree with you. I don't think that depends on who you are. And also what you mean by skepticism. People who have had this experience, and there are a lot of them, aren't going to be that skeptical. They know that an extraordinary thing can happen, and sometimes in the night. And second, if we're talking about perceptions, which is what we are talking about, then what does skepticism really mean? I mean, are you trying, would it be someone trying to say to me that I didn't have these perceptions? I did have them.
Strieber's experiences were later adapted into the 1989 film of the same name starring Christopher Walken.
You people, you sit there, you're in for one big surprise.
In the same decade, artist Bud Hopkins published the books Missing Time and Intruders, The Incredible Visitations at Copley Woods, the latter of which went on to become a CBS miniseries.
It tells the story of an Indianapolis woman, Kathy Davis, who had a bizarre encounter in July of 1983 in the backyard of her parents' home.
Either these things are happening as people think they are, as they report they are, and as we seem to find in regressive hypnosis that they are, or there's something extremely interesting about human people, about their minds, about the human species that we haven't begun to understand.
The popularity of UFOs was at an all-time high, and there were sightings across the globe, from Brazil and the Soviet Union to Gulf Breeze, Florida.
UFO, must have been a Gulf Breeze UFO. I thought they were only science fiction. What did I know?
We're down here in Florida, where we've assembled a whole town full of people who say they've seen the UFO that's haunted this community since last November.
It seemed like UFOs were everywhere, and the public were more interested than ever.
Our membership has gone up 10% in the past 2 months, and our mail has doubled. People are realizing that there is something to this, after all.
Now, if I gave you a full rundown of what happened in the 1980s in terms of ufology, we would be here for bloody hours. But it's also important to note that this is the era of the MJ-12 documents. These documents were part of a complex psychological operation involving the Air Force. So it does make me wonder whether the burgeoning popularity of the UFO abduction narrative in the late 1980s through to the 90s was organic or influenced by a larger campaign. But like I said before, we'll explore all of that and more in a future episode. But for now, let's go back to hypnosis.
UFO investigators have come to rely upon regressive hypnosis as the most efficient method of unlocking the forgotten period of time, usually an hour or two, and recovering the often harrowing account of what actually happened. Psychiatrists and psychologists who practice hypnosis have thus become our most helpful allies.
You could argue that the proliferation of hypnosis, especially outside of a medical setting, set the stage for a tidal wave of supposed abductees who genuinely believed that what they were recalling in hypnosis sessions had actually happened to them.
One of the big problems some people have with the whole field is the use of hypnosis. That it maybe as a tool it's over exaggerated, that there have been abuses in how it's approached. Your defense of hypnosis?
Well, essentially we have, the most important thing to start with is between 20 and 30% of all the cases we have, people remember them without hypnosis. Some of the most famous cases, the Travis Walton case, the Charles Hickson, Pascagoula case, many cases where they remembered it all without hypnosis. So what you're remembering under hypnosis is exactly the same as what turns up in just normal recall. I think that all the tape recordings that I have of my hypnotic sessions, I would certainly defend, I would certainly allow somebody to listen to one of those tape recordings if they had any suspicion that witnesses are being led or anything of that sort. I think it's a subtle business and not everybody knows how to do it right. It's one of the things that I'm trying to do, is to train therapists, psychologists, investigators, and so on, in the particular use of hypnosis in these cases.
In later years, Bud's ex-wife, Carol Rainey, published an in-depth expose of some of the cases he had worked on and his use of hypnotic regression. As it turned out, Bud Hopkins had continued to use hypnotic regression on people that had serious mental health issues, as well as overlooking glaring contradictions in his clients. While she noted that many of the people Bud had treated had undergone genuinely inexplicable human experiences, she also pointed out that they came primed to cope with the possibility that their experiences of life's traumas were caused by extraterrestrials. She would go on to write,
"These ufologists, whose ego supplies are dependent on their standing in this marginalized field, are desperate to keep bringing home the magic."
While disturbing for Judy, Judy, the revelation that her daughter Cindy had been taken aboard the alien craft must have been exciting for both Linda Moulton Howe and Dr. Leo Sprinkle. Here was another potential witness who could bolster the claims of her mother, another witness who could bring home the magic. After Judy's hypnosis session had ended, both Sprinkle and Linda Moulton Howe wanted her daughter Cindy to undergo regressive hypnosis too. In Linda's later book, Glimpses of Other Realities, it sounded like they were in contact.
2 witnesses at a single abduction event provided an unusual and valuable opportunity to see how closely their experiences might match or differ. But Cindy was afraid, Judy was protective, and both mother and daughter resisted the suggestion.
It took 10 years for Cindy to finally decide that she wanted to explore the experience from 1973. She was only 15 at the time. According to Judy, Cindy knew absolutely nothing about what had happened. After I was regressed in the 1978 and 1980 hypnosis sessions, more than anything else, I wanted confirmation from someone else that I wasn't going crazy, that what I remembered was the truth. I went to great lengths to not talk to my daughter Cindy about those sessions or what happened. I even locked tapes and books up at my house so Cindy wouldn't see them. I figured that if she ever agreed to hypnosis herself and described any of the same things, that would prove to me that I saw what I know I saw. But that directly contradicts what Linda Moulton Howe wrote about Cindy being afraid, and that both her and her mother resisted regressive hypnosis. Personally, I find it hard to believe that Judy Doraty kept the details from her daughter for a decade, and that Cindy had never watched Linda's documentary A Strange Harvest. It was a convenient story, of course. If Cindy didn't know the details, then surely, if she was ever regressed herself, any memories that she had would be organic and without outside influence. Well, as it turned out, Cindy had actually written a letter to Dr. Leo Sprinkle in January 1983, where she said,
"Back in 1973, my mother, Judy Doraty, myself, along with 4 other people, were coming from a bingo game in Houston, where we spotted a strange light in the sky. It followed us all the way to Alta Lama, where 6 other people saw it, and where it had begun to land or come down to around treetop level. The reason that I am writing you is after all these years, it is first now starting to bother me. I find myself thinking about it all the time and not able to sleep at night, and it is really starting to get to me. Why? I don't know. That is why I am writing you. I was wondering if there is anyone in the Texas City area that could come and talk with me about this problem. It would be very much appreciated."
While the letter doesn't explicitly state that Cindy knew the ins and outs of her mother's regression, it does show that she was familiar enough with Dr. Leo Sprinkle, and it also showed that she was keen on exploring the incident herself. Sprinkle wrote back to her with a list of UFO investigators that used hypnosis, and he added,
"I hope that you will call or write to them so that arrangements can be made for an interview. As you know, your mother, Judy Doraty, and I worked together in order to help her recall more of the 1973 sighting outside Houston. I believe that your own memories of that experience may add more information about those events."
I have no way of knowing whether Cindy ever contacted the people that Sprinkle suggested, but on August 6, 1990, 10 years since the on-camera hypnosis of her mother, Cindy underwent a hypnotic regression in Springfield, Missouri. It was organised by Linda Moulton Howe. In Linda's book, Glimpses of Other Realities, she describes Cindy as taller than expected and says that she was thin with a pretty face that was brightened by the gold dress she wore. Linda managed to catch a few private moments with Cindy while she nervously smoked a cigarette.
"I think my mom's full of it about all this light business, but I've got to prove it for myself. I don't think anything happened in Texas, and it bugs the hell out of me that my mom still talks about that stupid light. Even Jerry thought it was a helicopter."
The whole setup felt like a rehashing of what had happened a decade prior, right down to talking about Cindy's looks and the pre-hypnosis chat over a cigarette. But this time, there was no Leo Sprinkle, and there was a new hypnotist on the scene.
My name is John Carpenter, and I have the position in the Mutual UFO Network of Director of Abduction Research. I was just thinking here, it's real interesting. 5 years ago, I came as a naive listener and was learning from people like Linda about what all was going on. And today it felt more like a family reunion. I realized after I'd been trained in hypnosis and I had this avid interest in UFOs that, oh, they're using hypnosis now to help people with missing time. And I'm trained and I have the interest. And I thought, maybe I should volunteer. But Hopkins calls me at home, which about blew me away because I thought this famous author is calling me at home. And he apologized because he said he's about 2 months behind it in mail. But he was eager to talk to me because I was a professional that was using hypnosis, and he was using hypnosis with guidance from professionals. And so we talked for a good hour on the phone, and he referred me my first case right there in Missouri. And that was the beginning of many things because he made sure that I got invited to certain conferences and special meetings. But Hopkins really wanted to pull me in because he knew that we needed more professionals in the field to do this kind of work.
Because of Cindy's apparent nervousness, it supposedly took a long time for John Carpenter to be able to get her to reach a hypnotic state. When he finally did, a familiar story emerged.
I just see this big old light right down in front of the car, coming down from out of the sky in front of the car. It's moving around from left to right. It's like I'm sitting in the car, and it's like a spotlight hitting the ground. And it's going in front of the car from left to right.
Did it ever touch the car, the light itself?
Oh yeah, I think so.
Picture how that looked when that happened.
I think I'm still in the back seat. Everyone's getting the heck out of the car.
Fast?
Yeah, I think so.
What do you hear?
My mom hollering, "Oh shit!" I don't know what Jerry's doing. I know I'm kind of scared because I was afraid it was going to crash into the car or something. I could tell by everyone's reaction that there's something wrong, but I don't know.
Over the course of several hours, Cindy would relay details that were remarkably similar to her mother's 1980 regression. There were two beings with snake-like eyes and claw-like hands, a baby calf, and she claimed to have been taken inside the craft, where she was subjected to a physical examination that was witnessed by her mother.
I can see my mom looking in the window. She's screaming. How in the world is she in the window? She's screaming, "That's my daughter!"
Cindy underwent a second hypnosis session the next day, where she recalled the details of the inside of the craft, which was similar to her mother's description. The full transcript, as far as I know, has never been released, but reading what was available gave me the same feeling that I had while reading the transcript of Judy's session. At times it felt like an interrogation, an unrelenting push for more extraordinary details. For Carpenter and Linda, this was irrefutable proof. Here they had two women telling the same story under hypnosis. But if Cindy was aware of her mother's experience before undergoing her own hypnosis session, then it would have been easy for Cindy to replicate those details, whether she actually meant to or not. John Carpenter seemed painfully aware of that fact, but he had a story.
It might be assumed that during the 10 years between their hypnosis sessions that Judy Doraty could have inadvertently or deliberately given details of her experience to family members, including Cindy. Despite Cindy's claim that she did not recall that May 1973 night well, any offhand remarks by Judy could have encouraged the creation of some common knowledge. However, there is absolutely no evidence to support such assumptions.
Well, we know that that's not true because Cindy wrote a letter to Leo Sprinkle in 1983, but carry on, John.
Doubters can also claim that Cindy simply read a copy of Linda Moulton Howe's 1989 book, An Alien Harvest, further evidence linking animal mutilations and human abductions to alien life forms. That large book contains a complete transcript of Judy Doraty's hypnosis session. However, Cindy had never heard of Howe's book, and by her own admission has not had time to read because her life was dominated by raising 3 children and other domestic matters.
In my opinion, it requires a serious amount of credulity to believe that Cindy had no idea that her mother's experiences had been written up in a book, especially considering the fact that Cindy herself is mentioned in it. Also take into consideration the fact that it was Linda Moulton Howe that facilitated the hypnosis session between Cindy and John Carpenter. Now, I just want to make it very clear here that I'm not claiming that Cindy is deliberately or maliciously lying. What I am saying is that we have proof that she wasn't as shielded from her mother's abduction revelations as these investigators would like to make it seem. Of course, Cindy's hypnotic testimony becomes far less compelling if she's been privy to her mother's experiences all along. So it's not surprising that Linda Moulton Howe and John Carpenter would seek to downplay the fact that she had been. Remember, they're in pursuit of answers to the mysteries of the UFO phenomenon, and they can't let nagging details like the truth get in the way.
When this line of work becomes your cash cow in your career, you have a certain investment that you have to protect.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in this field, there's a lot of people that have put all their chips in behind 1 or 2 explanations, and they're going to support them come hell or high water. They're just, because they have a vested interest in promoting these things. I don't care what the answer is. I'm not stuck to any particular scenario. I think on some level they're all true.
These investigators believe so completely in the reality of their own interpretation of these experiences that they have lost touch with both consensus reality and the everyday ethics of human behavior that go along with it. They genuinely feel that the fate of humanity is at risk, and any tactic taken is justified by the need to warn the world of the coming takeover.
We are all personally involved in one way or another directly with this phenomenon. We have never been able to get information directly from the source before like we do now, meaning abductees, contactees, and the researchers are right there in the middle of it as well. So it is something that we're all involved in, and we can't separate ourselves from it completely ever.
After Cindy's hypnosis sessions, Judy said that she wanted only the truth to be told about what had happened, and that she wanted people to believe her. And for the record, I do believe her. I believe that whatever happened on the road that night was real, but that it became tainted by hypnotists that, for whatever reason, inserted their own details and worked to fulfill their own agendas. Her wanting people to believe made me think of something that I'd heard from paranormal researcher John E.L. Tenney.
I see people wanting acceptance of their experience by other people so much that it's damaging to them psychologically, sometimes physically, when the reality is you just have to accept it as your experience. Like, once you've accepted it, it doesn't matter again who else believes you or not. If the best read researcher believes you or not, or the skeptic can debunk it, you understand it for the experience that you've had.
And that made me think of the advice that Betty Hill gave to people who believed that they'd been abducted.
Well, if anybody comes to me and says, I think I've been abducted, the first thing I say is, stay away from UFO investigators. Do not have hypnosis.
I'm going to get a t-shirt with that.
Soon after her hypnosis session, both Judy and Cindy were featured on the first ever episode of the TV show Sightings. It was an appearance that had been organised by Linda Moulton Howe.
I didn't feel anything. I was you're just like time stops.
Cindy Doraty, abducted with her mother, Judy, in 1973.
And this is when I saw the spotlight then was doing this like a beam. They were about 3 feet tall. Their skin looked like it was made of marshmallow. And they had real big eyes. They had real large claw-like hands. So I couldn't tell if they were mittens or what. They didn't walk, they like glided. The bottom part of their legs kind of like almost robotic. Like a metal instrument that was kind of like shaped like an L. And it went all the way back down to here, though, in my throat.
It also featured John Carpenter.
We're looking at something which is more like what we do with wildlife. It seems scientific, it seems research-oriented. It seems like there's a real important purpose behind it, and not to interfere or destroy us, but in terms that we have something that perhaps they need, and perhaps they're helping us in some way.
I was interested in the trajectory of John Carpenter's career, so I decided to ask Jack Brewer about it. After all, he'd immersed himself in the strange world of abductee research in the 90s, and he told me.
John Carpenter was a hypnosis advocate, alien abduction researcher with the Mutual UFO Network, who seemed to have some really odd ideas about means and ends being justified. Documents obtained about the probation of his license show extremely dysfunctional relationships with some of the women that he was hypnotizing, and triangulation and interacting with their children, and just a great deal of things that you really wouldn't expect from any individual, much less a professional licensed therapist.
John Carpenter had taken around $14,000 from Robert Bigelow and the National Institute of Discovery Science in exchange for case files on 140 of his clients.
He was not open and transparent about it. At the time, it was secretive, it was covert, and none of the 140 hypnosis subjects and cases were made aware. None of the people involved were made aware that their file had been shared. He acknowledged to me that he did it. I published his acknowledgement, and I still have people, even when they reference it in their articles or when they start to ask me about it in an interview, will call it alleged.
Sadly, none of this feels surprising. Time and time again, we see so-called UFO researchers complain about the stigma that comes with the field.
There was such a stigma before, and that stigma was crushing the scientific investigation.
It's important that we remove the stigma and taboo.
And yet, unethical behavior has gone unchecked in the community for decades. If you dare to bring it up, then you're a bastard skeptic. You're a pariah, nothing but a debunker, or even worse, a federal agent. But isn't it valid to bring up these concerns about regressive hypnosis in regards to people who may or may not have experienced something strange? Isn't it valid to worry that UFO investigators are potentially vivisecting the souls of the people that trust them in pursuit of the answers to a mystery that will, quite possibly, never be explained? Sure, these stories make for great books, TV shows, and documentaries, but at what cost? In 2003, just 2 years before she died, Judy Doraty took to the internet to write an open letter regarding her own experiences within the UFO community. I fulfilled Miss Howe's agenda. She got an Emmy for her documentary, but I was left with all of the information in my head that needed siphoning. I asked her to help me write a book to be able to tell the amazing things that I was told and shown. She agreed and then kept putting it off. Both her and Dr. Sprinkle used my case for their own agenda and had little else to say to me. I guess I'm trying to warn all of you to be careful who you trust. Judy died on the 15th of January 2005. Aged 64. In her open letter, she wrote that she would love to understand her experience more before she died. I'm not sure if she ever did. Her daughter Cindy passed on the 6th of February 2016. She was 58. Cindy's obituary noted that she was a very spiritual person and connected to the earth. She was giving, free-spirited, open-minded, forgiving, loving, and caring. She will be missed by all who knew and loved her. Just a few months after Judy's hypnotic regression with Dr. Leo Sprinkle, another strikingly similar case appeared on APRO investigator Paul Benowitz's doorstep. This time, a young woman named Myrna Hansen had been abducted along with her son and a cow while they were driving home to Eagle's Nest, New Mexico. Much like in Judy's case, the cow was supposedly mutilated and there was a detailed description of animal parts in vats. But instead of being trapped on a UFO, Myrna Hansen claimed that she had been in a deep underground base somewhere in New Mexico, whether she was aware of it or not. The details that surfaced from her subsequent hypnotic regression with Dr. Leo Sprinkle in a tinfoil-lined car would form the foundation of a far-reaching conspiracy. They would become entangled with the strange events that had occurred in Dulce in the 1970s and a complex psychological operation led by military intelligence, eventually impacting both the ufological subculture and mainstream popular culture in ways that are still being untangled by researchers to this day.
The entire story of a secret treaty between the U.S. government and the aliens, of exchanges of technology between us and the aliens, of battles between aliens and American armed forces, and of aliens allegedly having implanted hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of human beings for the purpose of taking over the world and using us as cattle or slaves, came about as a result of the disinformation process.
While this installment has focused on the ethics of regressive hypnosis conducted by UFO investigators, the next episode will take a closer look at the involvement of military intelligence, specifically in the case of Myrna Hansen. Until then, keep your eyes on the skies and remember,
stay away from UFO investigators. Do not have hypnosis.
I'm actually quite baffled that it's taken me over a year to create a follow-up to the Dulce videos. I really wasn't expecting it to take that long. But I will say the entire subject matter and the entire subculture of ufology was driving me absolutely bonkers, and I had to take a bit of an extended break. But I think that break from the UFO topic has actually done me good, because I feel like I'm kind of reborn in a lot of ways, actually. Anyway, thanks for watching, and also thanks to my wonderful patrons for supporting me over there. I really couldn't do any of this without the support of people on Patreon, and it is genuinely I'm still shocked that people sign up for my Patreon and give me money. It's insane to me. It is insane. If you would like to become a patron, you can do so by checking out the link in my bio. At certain tiers you get access to Discord server, some Patreon only podcasts, Patreon only videos, you get early access to videos. So if you do like the channel, consider becoming a Patreon. A patron? A patron. All right, I'm going now. I've been doing this for hours. Bye. So I'm packing up my memories.